And apparently everyone is starving to death there. According to The Guardian here, they're saying that residents of a Syrian town a few dozen miles from the capital, Damascus, say they're dying of starvation as a result of a months-long siege by forces loyal to the governments of Bashar al-Assad. Families are eating leaves, grasses and water flavoured with spices in the town of Madaya, where rice is sold by the gram because a kilogram costs as much as £170. Some have killed and eaten their pets. Other activists inside the town also shared pictures of starving children, one being pushed in a buggy far too small for him because he was too weak to walk. Now, we'll come on to the photos in a moment. Now, here is a map of the area just to show you where it is we're talking about, not far from the Lebanese border. Vanessa, it's extremely difficult to understand who all the players in this game are. Could you, in a nutshell, give us an overview of who's living in Madaya, who's besieging them, what's behind this, what's the background? And because the Guardian's saying that this is a months-long siege and people have been suffering for months, but we're only beginning to hear about it now. So what's really going on here?
Well, this is another incredible demonstration of how these days, for many years now, the mainstream media is nothing more than a prostitute ring for the imperialist pimps, because we saw them, we have to take into account how rapidly this propaganda was inflamed, fueled and spread. And we are now seeing, we saw yesterday Vice, for example, remove or correct their article and publish an apology because they used fake photographs from 2013.
Right. So hold on a second. Here are some of the photographs that you sent me earlier. Now, these are tweets that have been doing the rounds of Twitter, and this particular set of images sent to Ben Affleck, who then was retweeting it on, for example. And on the right-hand side, we discover that these photographs were originally from when, 2013 or something like that. And here we've got another one which was doing the rounds on Twitter, and I believe this one was one of the ones that Vice published. But we find that this, in fact, was originally published on a website in April 2015, and more of the same. And this one, Vice actually tweeted this one out. And as you say, this was the original article that Vice posted, and they then had to issue a retraction, a correction. A previous version of this story contained photos purporting to show malnourished children in Madaya. Vice News has since learned these pictures may not have been taken in Madaya and has removed them. But everybody seems to be jumping on these images and none of them are real.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very few of them are. And I mean, I think what we need to do is to really, what the mainstream media should be doing, which is to investigate the situation before they turn it into this huge theatrical drama that we're seeing unfold, which was very similar, if you remember, to what happened with Yarmouk. And we have to look at the timing of Yarmouk, for instance, which was just before the elections in 2014 when that exploded. Well, I don't need to explain why it was necessary to create a drama at that time. But if you like, I can try and very quickly sort of untangle the propaganda that is being put forward by the mainstream media about Madaya itself.
So who is holding the siege?
It's, again, that's complex, Mike. I'll try and make it as straightforward as I possibly can. Just to begin with, Madaya itself, as you quite rightly say, is north of Damascus. It has about 600 militants in Madaya itself at the moment who come from Ara al-Sham, which is about 60%, 30% al-Nusra, which we know to be al-Qaeda, and 10% Free Syrian Army. Many of these rebels, I have been told, were originally from Madaya itself, which is a Sunni Muslim village, north of Damascus, near Kalamoun, and also very near Zabadani, which is being hotly contested, and that is connected, which I'll come on to. The number of residents has also been massively inflated up to 40,000, I believe, by The Guardian, and some have been saying 30,000. I have been told again that the realistic number is around 23,000. That's been supported by a 2012 population survey that I found. At the start of the conflict, we can say that a percentage of the Madaya civilians supported the rebel incursion and were supporting them purely because they saw it as a way for them to gain independence from the government. Madaya historically has, to some extent, been against the government. So it's not unusual that they have, in some ways, in the beginning of the conflict or the war on Syria, they have supported their own civilians and the rebels within Madaya. But in recent months, we have actually been seeing videos coming out of pro-Assad protests and demonstrations within Madaya itself. And this is where we should be saying, well, hold on. If this village is anti-Assad, it is basically occupied by Arar al-Sham and associates. Why are we seeing anti-Assad demonstrations within this village itself? And why are we seeing videos of villagers actually arguing with the militants that are occupying Madaya, saying, why will you not allow food in? None of these videos have been produced or put out there or published by the mainstream media. The reason we are seeing it is because on the 18th of October, the Red Cross, and this was a statement made by the Red Cross official yesterday, the Red Cross delivered food into Madaya that should have lasted them for 2 months. For 2 months. So that would have taken them up to the end of December, Mike. And what we are seeing are the citizens of Madaya complaining to the militants that they are stockpiling those food supplies. Now, this is something that we've seen them do elsewhere. We saw them do it in Yarmouk. We saw the photographs of fat rebels holding starving babies. So why are the rebels not starving and the people are starving? That's the first question that people should be asking here, because we saw exactly the same propaganda images coming out of Yarmouk. And it's exactly the same system that is happening here. The food is being taken by the rebels that are holding the town. It's being stockpiled. And the inflated prices are down to the rebels. These are the people who live amongst their own people, and they are starving them for propaganda.
So, Vanessa, if we look at this article, for example, in The Guardian today, this is the latest, the Syrian regime to allow aid into besieged, starving town, and the BBC covering the same thing again. If more aid goes in, what's going to happen to that food? It again falls into the hands of the rebels and they simply ramp up prices yet again?
While there is a need for propaganda, that is what will happen, yes. While this propaganda wave needs to be maintained, that is precisely what will happen. And let us also not forget that the UN went into Madaya on December the 28th, 9 days ago, and they evacuated injured fighters, militants, rebels. Are you trying to tell me, is the mainstream media trying to tell me that the UN would go into Madaya, they would evacuate injured soldiers, militants, and they would leave behind starving civilians? Or are you also trying to tell me that in 9 days, people will reach a level of starvation that we are seeing in those photos that we know do not come from Madaya?
So just absolute propaganda.
It's absolute propaganda. I mean, what I would like to do also is to explain the actual siege, because again, there's a lot of confusion. And the mainstream media, The Guardian in particular, yesterday was trying to put across that Hezbollah are involved in the siege. I mean, his way of discerning this is the fact that Hezbollah didn't deny that they were forming part of the siege. For him, in his supreme investigative journalism, this was proof that they were involved in it. The fact is that Madaya, in reality, it has to some extent been under SAA, Syrian Arab Army siege, since August 2015. But again, it's obvious from the Red Cross statement that they have been allowing essential supplies in, which have been being hijacked by the rebel occupation of Madaya, as we've explained. But it's also important to explain the reasoning behind this siege. I mean, siege is always going to be part of a war scenario anyway, to some extent. But the reasons for this siege are incredibly important. You know, we have seen in Kafara and Fua, which are Shia villages, in the Idlib province of Syria, an ongoing siege, a full terrorist siege since March 2015. Prior to that, since the beginning of the conflict in 2011, Kafara and Foua have been under partial siege and constant attack. Overall, those villages have lost over 1,700 civilians, 1,700, 300 since March 2015, when they were under full siege and daily barrage from the terrorist hell cannon, and starved. The Red Cross again made a very important statement yesterday that none of the mainstream media have picked up on, of course, because it derails their propaganda. They basically said where civilians are in government-held areas, Syrian government-held areas, Assad army-held areas, we never have a problem getting in. The one exception is Deir ez-Zor. However, if they try to get into any of the moderate rebel, in inverted commas, areas, they can't. They are refused entry, not by the Syrian government, not by the Syrian Arab army, by the rebels. So those civilians of Kafara and Foua have been starved pretty much since 2011, relying upon Syrian Arab army bread drops, that's all they were receiving. No medical supplies, no clean water, no warm clothes for over 3 years. They've just been able to extricate 300 families from Kafara and Foua. In Turkey, Iran is brokering negotiations with Ara al-Sham to not only free the civilians of Kafara and Foua and get them out of the siege and their occupation, but also, as you know, recently, rebel fighters from that area have been taken out and deported back to Turkey, where they came from. So these negotiations have been ongoing. However, the Ara al-Sham leaders have been refusing to allow their own rebels to leave Madaya. In fact, when the armed fighters tried to leave Madaya, they were shelled by their own compatriots within Ara al-Sham. Why? Because Zabadani, which has been the hotly contested area, is the Hezbollah stronghold in Syria. It grew up from the Palestinian camps after the 1948 Nakba. It grew from that, evolved into the Hezbollah stronghold. Now, this is where it has to become obvious what the agenda is here. It is Israel that is controlling Ara al-Sham. It is Israel that is saying to Ara al-Sham, you do not leave that area until you have cleansed Zabadani of the Hezbollah camps. Why? Because that ensures Israeli security in the region. That breaks the link between Syria and Hezbollah in Lebanon. It undermines the axis of resistance to the imperialist agenda, but also the Israeli agenda in the region. So the Ara al-Sham leadership has had pressure put upon it to keep its fighters in Madaya, to keep the propaganda rolling on the starvation of the civilians of Madaya. And what is happening is that the Syrian Arab army has put Madaya under siege in order to force Ara al-Sham's hand in the negotiations. And we've seen it work. What happened yesterday? The UN suddenly announces that, oh, yes, we can get food into Madaya.
Vanessa, thank you very much for taking us through that. I have so many questions going through my head. What I'd like to suggest live, so we'll see what we can do, but I would suggest that we have another session with you where it's dedicated to having a look at what's happening in Syria around these sieges, and then we can actually go into the detail I know you would like to go into on this one. But just before I come back to you, the other thing in my head was back in the 80s, I think it was about 1981, I visited Mogadishu, Somalia, with a Royal Navy warship. Outside the port were about 50 supply ships with food, which was desperately needed because of the starvation in that country at the time. And during the visit, what we were able to see was the reigning military regime were rebagging principally UN food, grain, and it was then being exported for cash, all on the black market to support these fractious military groups. So different country, but I saw with my own eyes how you end up with a situation where it's out of control. And what you're telling us, of course, is that the real situation not being reported by the mainstream press. Just give you 30 seconds to respond, and then I promise we'll have a look at doing a dedicated session with you if you've got available time over the next few days. What would you like to just close?
Yeah, I mean, in conclusion, and perhaps this is going to seem harsh, but I want to say to people that every time we blindly follow the propaganda path, it leads to bloodshed on scales we cannot even imagine. If we remember Iraq and Libya, where we signed the death warrant of millions and secured the devastation of healthy sovereign nations because we did not question the lies we were being told, these are more lies, and we need to think before we give money to these spurious NGOs that are demanding donations for the starving of Madaya that we know are not starving, because all it does is it puts money into the pockets of regime change agents, drug pushers, child traffickers, mercenaries, and killers working for NATO, the US, and Israel.